Greetings my chess friends, welcome to this little chess video, and it has to do with a subject that was raised by one of the contributors to the channel, John, and he was saying that when he is at chess club, what happens is that club players, when you play the King's Indian defense as black, the exchange in the center and the position becomes sterile and will tend towards a draw. And the position, or the variation he had in mind, I think is this variation here. It's a well-known variation of the King's Indian defense. The King's Indian. d6, this is all known moves, castles, bishop e2, e5. And here what white does is he takes in the center, d takes, queens are exchanged, rook comes to the d file, and knight takes e5. The knight cannot really take here because of this well-known variation, knight takes, and bishop takes. But you can see the point of what John is talking about, because the position is fairly sterile. We went from an opening with practically no middle game, essentially, to an endgame, I suppose, in some sense. Okay, there is a lot of pieces on the board. There's no queens on the board though. And there's not really any thing to fight for in the center. The position is fairly sterile. And with these elements, with the queen off, with no pawn play in the center, although at our level a draw is not inevitable, it's much more likely in positions like this because of the sterility of it and the symmetrical pawn structure. And I was really wondering about this myself personally, because I've been playing a player, and on the site that we play on the internet, there's maybe a pool of 15,000 players. Not all online at the same time. But out of all these players, he has the greatest draw ratio of any player. And every single time I've played him, the game has practically ended up as a draw. Except for a recent game that I finished yesterday. So what can we do then if we are facing players who are playing like this? They are playing variations that are drawish. Well, just let me show you my game, my friends. Okay, my chess friends, here's my game. My opponent opened with d4. Now normally I play the move d5 because I like to play the Slav defense. But I'm playing someone who plays for draws, or who is noted for playing for draws, who draws a proportionate amount of their games. So instead of this, I played the move knight to f6 because I want to keep the position asymmetrical. Because it stands to reason, if I can keep the position asymmetrical, there is a more likelihood that the position will become unbalanced. And this is essentially our first point for playing people who are known for making draws. Try to create a position that is asymmetrical. My opponent played knight to f3, I played g6, he played g3, I played bishop to g7, he played bishop to g2. Notice what he is doing. He is trying to create a position that is symmetrical. Well, we don't want that. I castled and he castled. And here, of course, I could play the move d5. But that is symmetrical. I want to create an asymmetrical position, so I played instead the move d6. He played c4. I played knight to d7. It's unsure whether I will play e5 or c5. He played knight to c3, preparing the move e4. And here I simply played the move c6. I'm simply prepared to take control of some central squares, because after the move e4 and e5, I think this is better for black, because if my opponent exchanges in the center, I will have control of not only the d5 square, but also the d4 square, pawn control of the d4 square, whereas my opponent simply has pawn control of a single square, d5. So I felt this would have been good for me. In the actual game, he left the position in the centre unresolved and instead played a prophylactic move, h3. And I really need to find something to do with my bishop here, because if you look, it has no real good squares where it can go to along this diagonal here. I need to find something for it to do. I played rook to e8, which is simply a flexible choice, bolstering my position in the centre. My opponent played rook to e1, again trying to keep a symmetrical position. And here I simply played another flexible move, rook to b8, simply getting my rook off this long diagonal here. My opponent played king to h2. I'm not sure what okay, his king is safe, but I don't think it was really under attack or was likely to be attacked at any time soon anyhow. I don't know. And here I myself played the move h6. I played it because I don't want this bishop here coming to the g5 square and exchanging itself for one of my knights. The position might end up closed. I don't know yet. And a knight might prove to be more valuable than a bishop. But I cannot really tell at this present time. So I simply want to avoid exchanges at this point in time. My opponent played d5, resolving the position in the centre. And here I played the move c5. Now it's much more clearer for me what to do. I have two pawn breaks that I can prepare. I can prepare either f5 and play on the king side, or I can prepare the move b5 and play on the queen side. My opponent played knight to b5, hitting this weakness that I have here on d6. It's not a real threat because I can simply defend and eventually kick this knight. I do that with queen to b6, defending my weakness on d6. b3 was played and I simply kick this knight with the move a6. The knight went back to c3 and my queen went back because my plan, of course, is to play the move b5 and try to create some type of weakness in this pawn phalanx here, create a target for my pieces. Bishop to e3 was played, developing the bishop on e3 and b5, c takes and a takes. And already the position is becoming a little unbalanced. Opponent played rook to c1 and I played b4, locking down on the weakness of these two pawns. And I have a half open a file for one of my rooks, and the position is becoming little more and more unbalanced. Knight a4 and bishop to a6, and eventually my bishop finds a square. The problem for it is that it is not really doing anything. The centre is closed. It might be that if I can exchange this bishop off for one of white's knights, it might prove to be beneficial for me. And this is the second point. When you are playing someone who likes to play for a draw and who likes to exchange pieces off, try and exchange off your bad pieces for their good pieces. And you can make a positional evaluation based on things like pawn structure or squares, whether or not your piece is a good piece or a bad piece, whether it has targets, whether it is doing anything, whether it would be better off the board. Queen c2 was played. Rook to c8. Knight came to b2. I'm anticipating this knight coming to c4, and I'm waiting and I'm hoping that it does. I play queen to a5, and the knight came to c4. And I was glad to swap off my bishop, which was doing absolutely nothing for this knight, which is hitting this weakness here on d6. Because quite frankly, this knight is a better piece than my bishop in this type of position. So I exchanged the b pawn and played rook to a8. And we have exchanged one of our bad pieces for one of our opponent's good pieces. Now the real motive behind this move, rook to a8, is not that it attacks the a pawn, although it does that. The real motive behind it is that it takes control of this square here, a4. Because I'm planning on bringing this knight here, to here, to here, where it will become an absolute monster. Rook to e2 was trying to shore up this weakness here on a2. The knight began its quest to c3, queen b3, knight a4, a3, trying to get rid of the weakness, but the knight makes it to c3. It becomes an absolute monster. A takes, and we simply a takes, supporting our knight. And this knight is beginning to boss these two rooks around. That is how powerful it has become. Rook to c2 was played, and I hope you noticed that there is a free pawn on the board. Yeah, this one here, and I simply said, pawn is a pawn, why not? Knight f takes e4. Knight to a4, sorry, h4 was played. Now, what do you think of white's two bishops? This one here and this one here. What appears to you to be the best of these? We can see the light squared bishop is hemmed in by its own pawns, here and here. And it would seem that this dark squared bishop is the better of them. Therefore, if we can induce our opponent to exchange this off, it might be good for us. Because we have a dark squared bishop on the board, which will remain there unopposed. So I played the move, knight to c5, tempting white to take my knight, which thankfully he obliged to do. B takes c5 and queen takes c5. King to g1 was played, and rook to a3. Now, it might be possible in some variations to trap this queen. For example, if we can bring our rooks to the A file. Of course, the queen at this present time has a single square, and we can simply harass her and maybe trap her, something like this. Now, my opponent felt this was the case also, and he exchanged queen for knight and rook. It's a logical thing to do. He played rook takes c3. Of course, I took the queen, and rook takes b3, exchanging his queen for knight and rook. But it came with a price. Rook to a8 was played, and my idea is simply to bring a rook here to the a3 point, because two rooks together are quite powerful. But if I can exchange one of them off, my queen and my bishop should be able to boss a rook, a bishop and a knight. Where against two rooks, a bishop and a knight, it's just a little bit more difficult. So I'm simply planning and bringing my rook to the a3 square, and my opponent cannot ignore it. And I'll show you why just in a second. Here he played rook to c2 and I played rook to a3. Now he cannot ignore it because there is tactics here like this. This pawn is pinned here, so he has to take. And he did. He played rook takes a3. I played b takes a3. And notice how this bishop is hemmed in by its own pawns. I played e4, simply opening up my bishop along this diagonal and preparing, of course, the advancement of my pawn. My opponent tried to blockade with the rook. I played queen to b4. He played knight to g2. This knight is desperately trying to scurry across to the queen side, but it's a short range piece and it's too far away. And here I simply played queen to b2. And of course my opponent resigned because there is no defense. The rook takes, pawn takes, and nothing on heaven or earth can possibly stop this pawn from queening. I was very pleased with this, my friends, because I had played so many games against this man and had drawn them. We had exchanged pieces, the positions had become a little sterile, they had become simplified, and here I eventually managed to win a game. Now I relate it to you because it shows some good ideas and principles that we can use and utilize to avoid playing players that are known for creating drawish positions. First of all, we create an asymmetrical position. Secondly, we try to avoid exchanges, and if we are going to submit to exchanges, we make sure that they are beneficial for us. We try and keep queens on the board. We try and create positions that are complicated. And all of these little things will culminate in a kind of a cumulative effect, and the position will eventually win itself. So my dear chess friends, I relate it to you because one of our contributors to the channel brought the idea up of what to do against players, especially club players, who are known for making draws. And I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you very, very much for taking the time, and suffice to say, I genuinely wish you well with your own chess. Take care and goodbye.